in the public sector, like for the Forest Service or the National Park Service, that I would be involved in making sure that the forest is cared for properly, to be, sustainable into the future, and to be a space for recreation and multiple use. Um, there are very different opportunities in the public sector versus the private sector where I work right now. I think it was my main, uh, the reason I chose to go into the private sector kind of first, um, was to get, to really dive into the experiences. Sometimes the funding and the staffing of the Forest Service is pretty limited, and it's not so much in private forestry, where we're actively harvesting timber, making profits, and also investing a lot in the research and progressing the science of forestry at the same time as managing it as a supply of wood for the country. So it was I just wanted to make sure, yeah, the forests were being taken care of, and as a forester, you get to see that directly.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And how about you, Jeff? How did you come about coming to Washington, working with Rayonier, and getting into natural resources and forestry in general?
Yeah, so my father was a landscaper by trade when I was growing up, so he was the one that really supported my love of the outdoors and environmentalism. And I was lucky enough to have a high school in Connecticut that offered agriculture programs through the FFA, which at the time stood for Future Farmers of America, but they've since expanded it to For the Future of Agriculture because it does encompass more than just farming. So through that program in my high school, they had a subsect called conservation, which we did things like tree and plant identification, chainsaw use, tree climbing with gear, honeybee management, just things like that, that again really just supported my love and interest in the outdoors. And I think I've always just kind of had an affinity for trees. I think they're an incredible organism and they do great things, and it's one of our most valuable natural resources. So that's kind of what spurred me into following forestry. And I was lucky enough that in New England they have a program where if your state college doesn't offer the program or major that you're interested in, you can basically go to any school in the region and they will cover you at in-state cost. So that made it very affordable for me to follow this career path. And upon graduating, I basically applied to every job under the sun, and Rayonier was nice enough to give me a chance to cut my teeth in the industry. So hadn't exactly planned on going as far west as I could, but I'm glad I made that decision.
I love that both of you have diverse experiences. So how David, you started in the public sector in forestry and went to the private sector. And then Jeff, how you actually went through a high school program and discovered your enjoyment of the environment and went from there. I want to ask you, were you able, both of you, were you able to ever do an internship in forestry or natural resources?
So I'm actually pretty disappointed and a little regretful that I wasn't able to do an internship, and especially as early on as high school. That would have been pretty incredible to get exposure to different career paths that early. But I had opportunities during the summer when I was in college to do internships. I just chose to work locally instead. And then my summer season with the Forest Service, directly after graduating, that was sort of a work internship. It was kind of a weird pathway that I went, but I was technically an employee. But yeah, and I was always quite jealous of the other students in the forestry program who had done internships over multiple summers, and they more often than not had full-time jobs as soon as they graduated. As a result of those internships.
So I was able to do a few internships throughout my college experience, but they were more in the realm of arboriculture, which is related to forestry, but it's more urban forestry on a much smaller scale. As David kind of alluded to, it's pretty difficult to get an internship with a forestry company because you have to have a lot of trust in your employees. You're managing thousands and thousands of acres a lot of the time, and yeah, it's difficult. I know a few friends who are able to do it, but you really have to have the right connections to make it work. But if you ever see those opportunities, I would jump on top of it because they're incredibly
Right.
valuable.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it probably has to do with just the labor and industries and the insurance around having young people become interns. Hopefully that's changing. So I want to ask what, and this question is for, I think, David. What is a timber cruiser?
So like any company with any sort of inventory. So the product that we sell is wood. The product that we grow is wood. And not all parts of the forest grow at the same rate. It is predictable to a certain extent, but so at any point within a forest's lifespan, we call a small section of the forest a stand. So in a stand's lifetime, you want to take inventory measurements on it to be able to see how the size of the trees and then initially the volume that is growing there. And so we're taking measurements like diameter measurements. We're wrapping a tape around the tree. We're using a laser hypsometer to get the height of the tree. You can also do it, with manual tools using a clinometer. So we use trigonometry in that, and we use that information so we get that raw data. It's analyzed using statistics, and then we get information about the quality of the wood that's there, the size of it, and the volume, and what products might be when it's harvested. And then we use that information not only for harvest, but for the activities that we do now as foresters in charge of silviculture. We can tell if there are too many trees growing in one space.
What's silviculture, David?
So yeah, I guess silviculture is important. Silviculture is basically the tending of trees. Any activity that we do to help them grow better, or any activity that we can do to manipulate the growth of trees, really. And that includes planting, fertilization, competing vegetation management, thinning, so reducing the number of trees in a given area, and then ultimately harvesting is also part of silviculture as well.
That's like forestry is, and of course, natural resources involves a lot of, like you said, science, but it sounds like it also involves a lot of technology, engineering, and math. And this one is for Jeff. You do the drone pilot stuff. Tell us about that in terms of the science and the STEM in forestry.
Sure. So within the first few months of me being hired at Rayonier, I was encouraged to become a drone pilot because, of course, they're looking for younger employees who are more familiar with the technology and computing. So I did an online training course. It's actually quite simple, but yeah, I received my Part 107 certification, which says I can use drones for commercial purposes, because they are regulated much more heavily than they were back in 2016 when Part 107 regulations went into effect. But we use our drone for myriad applications. We're using them to look for hot spots for fires. We're using them to look at stands that might need treatment for thinning, like David alluded to. We're using them for our real estate branch. They just have a huge amount of use in our industry because we rely heavily on remote sensing, which is the use of satellites, drones, planes, etc., to collect imagery from remotely, right? So yeah, it's just incredibly helpful to have that at your fingertips. And we're continuing to learn and grow. We've got a team of what we call super users who are kind of at the cutting edge of the new industry technology. So it's been great.
So what's a day in the life like for a natural resources manager? And we'll start with David.
So kind of the great thing about it is that it changes from day to day. In our current positions, so right now I'm about 50% in the office and 50% in the field. So out in the woods. When I was cruising timber, I was out in the field about 90% of the time and only coming back to the office to kind of bring in the data and do some more clerical work. So it changes day by day, and it also changes by the season, because we have different activities based on the seasons. The trees that we grow are typically dormant in the winter, so that's when we're able to do activities like using herbicides to control competing vegetation, and then also when they're dormant, it's the best time to plant, and it's also the wettest time, so it's a hospitable environment for the new seedlings to grow. So pretty much from late November, early December to March or April, we're planting, and that's kind of where all of our efforts go to during the main part of winter. And yeah, we're planning and conducting the planting of just in my working area, 700,000 trees. I think in Washington, we planted over 2.3 million this year. So 2.3 million trees we planted this year. Um, and so, yeah, during the winter, we're doing a lot of tree planting, and we also fertilize in the early spring. And then as it moves into summer, we are doing a lot of thinning applications, and we're getting prepared, planning and permitting for the burn piles that we do in the fall. So yeah, changes day by day and season by season. But I guess I can describe kind of what I've done this past week. Um, one day I was on a computer program, ArcMap, which is just a mapping software, and so I was making large scale maps for use in navigation and to kind of show the extent of different projects that we're doing. And then this past week, we've been going out into the field and very much doing what a timber cruiser might do, and taking precise measurements for a PCT research plot. So we're out in the pre-commercial thinning research plot. Sorry, I keep on using all these terms. Yeah, all these terms that I think everybody knows, but really it's just because I talk to other foresters all day.
Pretty epic there.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it can be time in the office, time in the woods. We spend a lot of time dealing with contractors. There's a lot of jobs not only with the landowning companies, but also the contractors that do the work that we're prescribing for the forest. So we honestly deal with a lot of people as well, in addition to all the trees. And if you want to add to that on what you do
Yeah,
on
that was the long and the short of it. We always anticipate this question, but I'm never happy with my answer because it's really difficult to answer. As David mentioned, there's a lot of diversity in our work. So there really isn't an average day. It changes so drastically seasonally and by what's required of you. So that's one thing I love about it, is it's always fresh and interesting. There are always opportunities to go outside, but at the same time, we do a lot of number crunching and data analysis. We are not exempt from the big data. When David was back cruising timber, he would bring back reams and reams of information, and somebody's got to sort through that, and that informs our management decisions. So, yeah, I think David hit on a lot of it, but there's a lot going on. So, never a dull moment.
Well, what I love about learning about what you guys do in natural resources and forestry is that there is a lot of STEM, but there is the people aspect to it, and of course the environmental aspect to it. And so I want to actually open this session up to our students. Do any of our interns and students, do you have any questions for Jeff and David right now? And you guys are welcome to send your questions via the chat screen as well.
Yeah, and just in the vein of kind of talking about all the STEM that's involved in forestry, kind of one thing that a lot of our professors, it's been recited in the forestry like education, is that foresters wear many hats and land managers wear many hats. So we have to know, we don't have to be experts, but we have to know at least the very basics of geology, and watershed management, statistics, trigonometry,
Chemistry, biology, meteorology, physics, the list goes on. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's that's part of the fun of it though, and that's where the art comes in, is you have to be a little creative and kind of try to mesh all of these things together.
Hey, we're getting a couple questions from our students. The first one is from JP. He asks, what's the most interesting thing to you about your profession?
You want to take that one?
You can go first.
Oh
I didn't
boy.
think about it.
I think that's kind of in the same vein of what we were just discussing. The diversity of the work and our reliance on all these different sciences. I love science. That's part of the reasons I got into the field and into a STEM career. And just having to know all of those things, but not be an expert, as David said, you're always learning. Like, this industry has been in the Pacific Northwest since people moved out here, and we continue to learn new things every day. So there's always a space for you to grow and do some more research.
Our intern, Ellie, she asks, she said, do you work with wildlife biologists? How do they help you with your positions?
So we interact not so much in our positions, but other people within our company who are more geared towards dealing with the planning and permitting of harvests. They deal and they get to interact with wildlife biologists, usually from the Fish and Wildlife, the Washington State Fish and Wildlife, and other federal agencies. And they provide a much needed consideration for wildlife concerns when planning harvests and any forestry activities. I know our engineers work a lot with them when installing culverts and when redesigning bridges. We actually have a huge program called RMAP, which is a road management and abandonment program, which external wildlife biologists are really involved in. And they basically created the basis for the plan, which is to help water quality and aquatic species kind of restore their natural habitat. And some of the roads we built in the past, public roads, private roads, they need to be reassessed. They need to be fixed. Sometimes they put in culverts that are too small, so they have bigger pipe to allow for fish passage. Also, if we don't need a road or a bridge, we don't use it. We abandon it after we need it, so the stream can go back to its normal flow. So that's kind of definitely with aquatic species. We deal a lot with wildlife biologists, and also a little bit with fish and game about bear, elk, and deer. Um, those are usually involved with our recreation and hunting departments.
You know, that's awesome, because I know Ellie is she's interested in marketing, but her number one interest is marine biology. And so this is really cool to learn that even in forestry, biologists, wildlife biologists, people who are specialized in marine biology and aquatic species have a place in forestry.
Yeah, and they don't seem at all related, but the salmon is an anadromous fish, so it spends its adult life, for most of its life, in the ocean, but eventually they come back. So yeah, it's all tied together.
Yeah, and being in Grays Harbor, we're pretty lucky to be, right on the coast and have a lot of amazing rivers for our salmon populations. And Rayonier owns quite a large percentage of the land around like the Hump Tulips and the Copalis, and a little bit on the Wainuchi rivers. So I know we have a lot of partnerships with, especially Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, to be improving that salmon habitat as well.
The next question is from Cruz, who's also our intern. And his career pathway is actually electrician. He wants to be an electrician, a lineman, and he actually was doing an internship with Polson Museum here in Hoquiam, and helping to refurbish their museum and create a new space for them. And Cruz asks, how many days of the week do you work? How much do you work in your your positions? Is it, do you work weekends? Do you work nights sometimes?
That's a good question. We really are required to work as much as the job requires. So this past weekend, I ended up working a Saturday because it was the tail end of our planting season, and we had to get the seedlings in the ground before the weather changed. And during fire season, which typically runs from May until October, we're on call 24/7. If there's a wildfire, we need to respond. So yeah, it's as much as the job requires, but I'd say on average we're working 5 10s a week.
And there
And
are, sometimes being out, even if you're in the field all day working an 8 to 10 hour day, including drive time, some of it doesn't feel like work. It definitely can, but if you're outside and kind of enjoying nature, while also being productive, um, it's a different setting than if you were sitting behind a computer all day for each day your work. And then, yeah, once again, the variety in our daily activities helps break it up a lot. I know. So yeah, we work, we're salaried employees, so it's not like we have to punch a clock. It's very much dependent on what's going on that day and when the activity is happening. But I know some other foresters with the Department of Natural Resources, some of them take the option to take 4 days a week and 10-hour days. So they get their 40 hours just in a shorter work week, and that works for them. But it doesn't always work for us like that because our contractors and the other activities that we have going on aren't on a 4 days a week type of schedule.
wow, we are getting some great questions here. And I want to get to Mary's before we end the session. But for now, we're going to go with Ellie and JP's question. Ellie asks, do you have a favorite type of tree? And then JP asks, how many different types of trees do you work with?
We'll both answer. My favorite type of tree is a noble fir. I think it's the best Christmas tree, and it has a really great form, and it's just like very stately when you see a 200-year-old one in the forest. I just think they're beautiful, and they smell amazing too.
Good Christmas tree.
They're the best.
I'm partial to the East Coast because that's where I was born and raised. So my favorite tree is the sycamore. The Latin name is Platanus occidentalis. It just gets this really beautiful camouflage, patchy bark, and yeah, just reminds me of home.
And there was a follow-up question. How many different types of trees? So this year we planted 8 different species.
8 different species. Yeah.
There are more that grow. Typically we don't plant any hardwood species like alder. They don't have a problem coming up. So I guess probably closer to 10 species, including the ones that grow without our help. So we work with primarily kind of in order of most common to least common. We've got Douglas fir, which is actually, well, it's all around us. We've got a hemlock right here. And then we typically plant Sitka spruce, western red cedar, grand fir, noble fir,
Pacific silver fir, western red cedar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we get to deal with a lot. But by far the most common is Douglas fir and western hemlock. They're the most commercially important species here and are kind of the best wood quality for dimensional lumber and kind of those higher value products that we're striving to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, we are getting some great questions. Before I get to Cheryl's and Katrina asked, how many hours do you usually work? And I think that Jeff said about 5 10s, 5 days, 10 hours, days, 5 days a week, 5 10s. But
Yeah.
Cruz asks, what tree?
Office days are typically 8 hours.
Typically, sorry, 8 hours?
Oh no, go for it. Yeah. Office days are typically closer to 8 hours. Field days, just because their driving time is included, closer to 10 hours. But then again, it's variable.
So that's kind of cool if any of you students are into flexibility and travel. That it's really cool this is a great career path to get into, because it sounds like, yes, you're going to be working some long days, but you get to travel in, and you get to switch between the forest and the office, which is awesome. Cruz asks, what trees grow the best? And I kind of want to add to that, what trees grow the fastest?
Well, that's a great question, and it's something we grapple with all the time. As silviculturists, that's one of the most important decisions we can make when managing the forest, but it's really site specific. In really low wet areas, a pine species might grow the best. In our really high site upland ground, Doug fir is typically the best species, and we often find, regardless, Doug fir will grow the most quickly. But that's also the species in which we've put a lot of our resources behind in terms of understanding the genetics and what kind of gain we could get. So.
Yeah, the internal research department that we have for the corporate Rayonier, they're mostly based in the South, so they're growing a southern pine species, but we also have a lot of effort that's gone into genetic research for Douglas fir, actually, and western hemlock as well. Yeah. But so we've had, I'd say, over 50 years worth of research on Douglas fir genetics, and then so they're using artificial selection to make improvements to kind of the genetic source of our Douglas fir seed. And then we grow those in contracted nurseries, and then we get to see those benefits when genetically improved, through artificial selection. When one of those genetically improved trees is 5 feet taller than the normal seed source you would get from a tree that grew up, was not improved in any way. So we get to see that, and yeah, I'd say, but also at the same time, and it's a very long-winded answer. At the same time, western hemlock sometimes will outgrow the Douglas fir that we plant, especially in some sites in Grays Harbor that we're so close to the coast. And hemlock really likes those shady, moist, really foggy hillsides. So sometimes we'll plant some very fast-growing Douglas fir, and then 5 years later, the hemlock will be over top of it. So it kind of very much depends on the site.
I was trying to share them that very nuanced answer.
I have a couple more tree questions, and then we have some questions about just general education and professions. So one of our interns, Katrina, who is one of our Washington State Parks interns, and she was actually going to start with Washington State Parks at Ocean City and here in Ocean Shores until the stay-at-home order happened. But Katrina's pathway is definitely natural resources and the environment. And she asks if you take samples from the rings of the trees. And I want to add to that, when do you harvest the trees? Like, is it after 10 years, 20, 25 years?
So yeah, we do take tree core samples by driving a small cylinder into the tree, and we're able to get information about how much that tree has grown each year. We've got a really intensive data collection protocol, and we manage the forest so intensely that we're usually not curious how old the tree is. We usually know when it was planted or when it was established. But if we want to get information about how that tree has grown over time, as far as putting in growth in diameter, that's when we would use tree cores.
And then for harvest age, of course, it's variable, but we usually say between 35 and 40 years old.
Do you ever run into any redwoods at all? I don't think they grow this far north, but have you ever seen one of the odd ones that might have somehow made it this far to Washington?
Only the ones that David's planted.
Yeah, I have planted a few. I got them as a gift when I went to a career fair down in Oregon. But typically, no, they don't grow naturally, or even any rogue seeds don't do too well up here. I think the growing season is too short because of how far north we are, and just generally the climate's just a bit different.
I think the northern extent of their range is southern Oregon. Is that
Southern
right?
Oregon, yeah, coastal Oregon. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went to school in San Luis Obispo, and our school had an experimental forest in Santa Cruz in the heart of the redwoods. And that's kind of that redwood forest definitely made me fall in love with forestry. And it's such a unique species too that it's definitely, I can understand why we got that question.
I think for me, the giant redwood is one of my favorite trees, definitely. So I want to get on to these other awesome questions. This is from Mary Roberts, and she is the counselor at Elma High School and very much a huge supporter and an angel to our program. And she asks if you can tell us about the certification and licensing process to become a drone pilot.
Sure. So the online course I took was called Drone Pilot Ground School. And you really just have to study until you're comfortable with the material. There's no gauge of you need to study X hours, whatever. It's becoming familiar with the material to the point where you think you're ready to take the test. And through that online training program, they offer a lot of practice tests, which a lot of the questions are sourced directly from the Part 107 test. So I would highly recommend checking that out. But other avenues I've heard people taking are just watching YouTube videos. So it's a great resource these days. And additionally, the Federal Aviation Administration posts a huge amount of information on their website, which could be a good source.
That's really wonderful. Have you ever heard of any high school type programs that teach our youth about drone technologies at all?
I've seen articles. I can't say. Yeah, that's kind of out of my wheelhouse. I know they do exist, and I gave a presentation to some of Mike Machowick's students at Aberdeen High, so there might be interest there. But yeah.
You know, it's like it's such a new technology that drone technology that it's new, but it's fast growing across all types of industries. And for me, just learning like, wow, we're using it in forestry. I know from my military experience, you know, we use the drones. I know Amazon.com wants to use them for deliveries. Hollywood has been using them in cinematography and production purposes. So it's awesome to see that the technology is growing so fast that it is being related to the environment. But it's so new that, yeah, there isn't really, it doesn't seem there's a formal education around it. Like you said, I think people just have to do the YouTube videos, buy a drone, and then investigate on the FFA and the 107, what was that, the Regulation 107 websites for training.
It's Part 107.
Part 107.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to get all this.
It's interesting. I've heard some stories.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying it's interesting. I've read some stories about how certain countries are using drones in fighting this pandemic we're living through. Like in Wuhan, China, they were using the drone to check people's temperatures from like the side of a balcony, see if they're having fever. So yeah, the applications are almost limitless. It's just how creative can we be?
Absolutely. That's a great answer. And we have another question from Cheryl. What entry-level positions are available in your field? Or what type of degree is needed in order to land a great job in natural resources?
Yeah, take that.
So most commonly, if you're working for you know, a forestry, private forestry company, or even within the public sector like Forest Service or National Park Service, they're generally looking for a bachelor's degree in any environmental science or natural resource related field. I'd say forestry is definitely the most broad as far as terrestrial land management goes. But you can, so we have a geomorphologist on staff that specialized in botany, and she's actually got her PhD, or not in botany, in geology. And she's, got her PhD and works closely with our timber harvesters. I just have a bachelor's degree in forestry and natural resource management. And so just with that degree, some of the entry-level positions are timber cruiser. Jeff entered as a resource forester. Um, and I'd say there are other positions. Usually you're working at the entry-level positions with private timber companies. You're working directly under a more experienced forester. And after you come in at an entry level, but as soon as you get a couple years of knowledge in there, we've seen it's very quick to get promoted and to bump up to higher, pay grades and responsibilities.
Thank you so much for asking. Are you good on time with us? We just have a few more questions to ask.
We can stick around.
We're happy to stay with you.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so Cruz just asked, what is your salary? And you can give us a range if you want.
So when I started, the salary range was 40 to 50,000, and with every year of experience you get, there's potential. At least with our company, they do a midpoint analysis, so they take data from all the companies, kind of nationwide, and create a scale based on the average income based by year of experience. So each year you're looking, starting between the $40,000 to $50,000 range. If you're staying in one pathway, you're looking at bumping that up by $3,000 to $5,000 each year, which is pretty typical. Until you reach a certain point, I'd say for our position, and unless we get promoted, I'd say the cap is probably around 75, maybe if you're really experienced, maybe 80,000. And then, there's lots of room for growth within Rayonier as a company, and then also, in other private forestry companies that are structured a little differently.
This is great. It's a living wage job, and I'm sure it has great benefits. What kind of other perks might your work or the natural resources careers pathway has with Rayonier, besides traveling to awesome places?
Yeah, so we have a really comprehensive set of benefits that include retirement savings, dental, medical, vision. As you mentioned, we get opportunities to travel all over the country. This past September, they flew me all the way down to Houston for a few days for a conference. And yeah, it's a great company to work for.
And some of the hidden benefits that I've found are, since Rayonier has a decent area of land that they own and manage, we've got a lot of roads that lead pretty close up to very nice rivers. So we get kind of just this unique view and these kind of almost exclusive access to great camping spots and just kind of hidden parts of the forest that most people don't get to see.
Speaking of the hidden parts of the forest that most people don't get to see, have you ever encountered Bigfoot or aliens way out there in the forest?
Yeah, but lots of black bears, coyotes, deer, elk. Still haven't seen my cougar, but I'll see one eventually.
I've seen enough cougars to make up for Jeff's lack of cougars. But now, usually, unfortunately, what we do see often, and I know it's happened a lot more before there were gates, but a lot of people abuse the forest and the roads that we have out there. So a lot of people will dump trash and old appliances out there. So that's the one thing we're usually not excited to see when we get into the forest. But if anybody was wondering why the gates are on the forest roads, that's why.
Yeah, I think we as humans need to modify our behaviors when it comes to our environment and wildlife. Ellie asks, how close, have you ever been close to any of these animals? Have you ever had serious or scary encounters with wildlife
Got a
out
good
there?
story for you. It wasn't David or myself, but one of our cruisers, David's old position, he was sitting on a stump along the road, just entering some data into his iPad, and just out of the blue, a cougar hopped into the road, not 10 feet away from him. They both kind of spooked each other, and then it just jumped off into the brush. So that gave him a pretty good spook, and he didn't go back out to the woods for about 3 weeks.
Wow. I was going to ask, like, do they give you bear spray, and stuff like that when you're out there to protect you just in case you have those encounters?
It's kind of a bring your own policy, but most of the animals you will run out there are very skittish. They're more frightened of us than we are of them.
Right.
Seen tons of black bears, never had an issue, never been concerned.
Mhm.
And also when we're in the forest, it's also regulated by OSHA. So we have to look out for our safety. So we're wearing bright colors, and we've got usually, pretty good rain gear on. We're usually this bright orange or bright yellow blob moving through the forest.
Making a lot of noise.
Yeah, making noise, a lot of, probably we smell weird. So they don't bother us too much.
Wow, that is so exciting. Hey, do any of our interns or our counselors or Cheryl, do you have any other questions for Jeff and David? I have a quick question. So it seems like if someone wanted to go into natural resources, they can take many paths. They can study wildlife biology. They can study probably botany, study about, what did you call it? Civiculture?
Silviculture,
Yeah,
yeah.
silviculture.
And all of the other STEM areas. But I don't know how close you guys might work with the administration of Rayonier, but what sort of professional positions in terms of marketing, business administration, finance, maybe real estate sales and development are available through Rayonier and in the natural resources arena?
Okay. So our headquarters is based near Jacksonville, Florida. They actually just made their own town there through the real estate division. But I could tell you we're not a huge hire in those realms that you've mentioned, but we do have people in all of those positions. So there are opportunities. And of course, we're not the only natural resources company out there. So there's demand. So although we may only hire like, I don't know, 10 accountants, I'm just picking a number out of the air, there are dozens of other companies that will be offering that same position.
That's a great question, great answer. And you said demand. How much in demand are natural resources careers today in 2020? And is it increasing demand?
Yeah, I think so. So in like a lot of other industries, a lot of the baby boomers are retiring, and typically, especially like a kind of a dirt foresters who are out in the woods a lot are those folks are retiring. So there's kind of a shortage of experienced people in the natural resources. So there are usually tons of jobs in natural resources, especially the entry level ones. Um, and even though a lot of the technology that we're using now is kind of reducing the need for as many people, as we explore the new technology, we always need people to be able to make sense of that new information that we're getting. So there are likely to be new jobs just coming online from kind of analyzing the data that we get from drones, those aerial images, and that type of LiDAR, remote sensing data. So yeah, we've got I think fairly high demand, at least for entry level natural resources jobs.
I can only speak to my experience, but I was only out of college for a month, maybe two, before I stumbled into this career, which is what it's become. I didn't entirely anticipate that or was looking for it, but that's what it is. And I feel very lucky to have followed this path.
So both of you, of course, went to college. Can someone who graduates high school and who perhaps focused on science or STEM and perhaps did a Grays Harbor Youth Works internship, can they get a cool entry-level job working with Rayonier or a similar company in Grays Harbor?
Absolutely. I wanted to mention that before, but we kind of always have our blinders on with our own experience. But we hire a bunch of contractors, many of whom did not have any education past high school, and that's kind of that's our bread and butter. We depend on that workforce, and they're out in the woods as much or more than we are. So there's plenty of opportunity there.
Yeah, the education that we've had provides like a good basis for our knowledge and for growing our experience. But some of the people who have worked in the industry and have had almost nothing but experience, they have an incredible wealth of knowledge, and they are also successful in the forestry, kind of the business side of it as well.
Do you know if Rayonier offers any educational benefits in terms of like maybe student loan repayment or sending workers to school or like tuition reimbursement programs?
So they do not do like a retrospective reimbursement. Like they didn't help me pay for my undergrad debt, but moving forward, if I were to pursue my master's, they would support me. It's a vested interest, but they'll cover a huge portion of the cost to continue your education.
Wow, that's fantastic. And that's something that the interns here and the students here may want to consider, that you don't have to exactly go straight to college after high school. You might be able to work at a company like Rayonier, learn the ropes, and then from there maybe get on to doing tuition, get on with them as an employee and take a part in some of those educational benefits.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's incredible.
In our internship program, it's definitely like we look to recruit students who are in a 4-year degree program. But if you're expressing interest and you're maybe even at a community college, or you're actively pursuing your education and you're not at a 4-year university, we still very much consider those students, especially if they're local, and would be great fit for internship positions.
Wow, that is awesome, especially for Katrina, Cruz, Adrian, and Ellie, who are on our call. That's just fabulous. That's a great pathway to consider. Do you guys have a summer program maybe for high school grads at all? Do you know?
I don't think, not yet. We don't have anything geared toward high schoolers quite yet. And that just kind of is based on we have entry-level positions, but they're limited. And then we also use a lot of contract work for some of the things that, interns might do. Because it's tough, especially younger interns, to get them trained up correctly on the instruments and the tools that we use. But I think there's always like room for discussion about that.
Bill and I are going to be doing that soon.
Awesome.
So let you guys know. Excuse me.
Okay, I want to give a last call to our students. Do you have any other questions? Or Mary or Cheryl, do you have any other questions? Perhaps Ruth Ann? Oh, here we go. Ruth Ann, she is our counselor from Wishkah High School. And she asks, are you working on the backside of Wishkah High School? Do you work in the Wishkah Valley at all? Which is kind of like I guess at the base of the Olympic Forest.
Yes, we definitely do. We have some land that's we access off Wishkah Road, and that's the watershed that it's involved in. I want to say that Green Diamond and some other timber companies kind of that area that's there for us.
Our ownership starts to peter out that far east, but we do have some in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, we're a lot more present in the Hoquiam and the Hump Tulips watersheds.
This is wonderful because this is a company here in Grays Harbor that is pretty much close. It's in our community. And so any of you guys who are considering wanting to stay here in Grays Harbor instead of travel at this time, once you're able to graduate, you can always stay here and find opportunities with companies like this or the companies they work with to find contractors. for your entry level. That's awesome. I think I'm out of questions. How about you, Cheryl or Mary? Any other questions, Ruth Ann, or my interns, our interns?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Oh, yep.
I'm good.
Okay. Cheryl is just saying that all of our business state how they want to keep our students here. And so Jeff and David, we are so honored to have you on our new weekly Thursday series. You're our third week. And this has been probably one of the best so far of our meeting series. Very incredible information. I'm going to definitely shoot you an email and our students and everyone on this meeting an email about some of the links that you talked about. So I'll have that out there, and you guys are welcome to respond to it and add anything else that you would like to say. But thank you so much from Olympia and Rayonier. So
Thanks, guys.
yeah, thank you so much. That's David and Jeff from Rayonier, Natural Resources Managers, and they just told us that it's not necessarily about planting trees and harvesting. There's way much more, lots of awesome science, great technology, lots of engineering, math, but wonderful, for me, actually wonderful science for the wildlife and the biology of it. It's just fantastic. And of course, travel. You know, for me, I think, and that's why you want to do an internship. You want to find what you're interested in. For me, I love positions. All of my favorite positions I've had in my careers have involved travel. And so it's wonderful to find out that the natural resources pathway involves that. And it also has that people element. So while we're developing our skills, our hard skills in the sciences and STEM, always be working on your soft skills when it comes to people, communication, compassion, especially for our environment and our wildlife as well.
Very good.
Yeah, do you have any last words to say before we jump off the meeting here?
I think that's it, but thank you for having us, and we were really happy to share kind of what we do on a daily basis. I hope you guys, I hope that's helped you guys make some decisions about your futures.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I want our interns to stay on. We're going to do a little feedback session just for a few moments. But thank you so much, Jeff and David, for joining us. And please be well and stay safe in these unprecedented times.
All right.
Thank you. The same. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. All right. How's everyone doing? Good. This was a fabulous discussion. I know I learned a lot about natural resources. What about you guys? What did you learn? Whoever wants to start first, go ahead. What are some of the takeaways that you learned today? And is this a career path that you might be interested in?
I didn't realize there was so much behind what they actually do. Like, I didn't know they did so much math and science and everything. You don't really, like, when you think of forestry, which I think is the main thing they really focus on.
Yeah.
It seems like it anyways. I don't know. But you kind of just think of, like, planting trees and stuff. You don't really think of how they have to measure how long it takes for the tree to grow or what soil it works best in. So I thought that was really cool.
You know, I have gardens around my house, and I'm always trying to figure that out with just the vegetables I grow and the berries and the cool flowers, the wildflowers for the pollinators. And to just hear what they do, it's kind of like they do the same thing, but on this massive scale. They are saying that they manage like 70,000 acres of forest. That's a big garden. You know, it really is. And then they have to consider all of the other stuff about roads. You know, they're building roads, but they're also taking out the old ones and restoring all of the impacts that the company and the humans make, and restoring those impacts for wildlife to be able to reuse again and to be able to strive and thrive. So that's fascinating. What about you, Cruz or Brianna or Adrian or Katrina or JP? Did you guys have any interesting insights or takeaways?
I thought it was pretty cool how they talked about how they use the drones
Yeah.
and how they're advancing, especially with today's technology, how they're changing everything. So I thought that was really cool.
I did too. You know, drone technology is so fascinating. And, you know, it's amazing how much it's taken hold and growing so fast in all kinds of industries. And for forestry, I can imagine, you know, being Jeff out there with his like little remote control, and he's sending up the drone and he's looking on a screen and flying over these vast expanses of forest. And it's you know, expanses we can never go on, you know, we can't, because that's private property, right? So we can't go there, go to those places that they see. And I'm sure like JP just said the drones are probably his favorite thing he learned today. Yeah, I totally agree, you know. And they probably, I'm sure there's areas where they plant trees, and as the stands of trees get bigger, that it might be more harder to hike through and to walk in. So that's when the drones come in, because they don't have to go through that struggle through the brush and all of that stuff. Now they can use the drones and see exactly what's going on and to see how to get there, you know. Katrina says, I like how they work with fish and wildlife. That's a big thing. One of my takeaways that I liked was how, okay, you can work for a company like Rayonier, right? But even if you work with them, you're still going to be working with other stakeholders. And so, yeah, you might be working with the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. You might be working with the federal agencies like the Department of Interior. And you might be working with some nonprofit groups or non-governmental organizations. And then they also said that they, you know, work with contractors. So I'm sure there's probably some science labs or some companies that specialize in wildlife biology or marine biology. And so they probably contract their services to help them with what they do as they're planting these forests and harvesting them. So that's pretty cool how they get to work with all kinds of people. Adrian, yeah, he said, I like how they were talking about how they don't only work with forestry, but they work with wildlife too. Yeah, that I don't want to run into a cougar. I just want to say, yeah. and I've had some black bear experiences, and black bears, if they're in the wild, they are skittish, you know. Yeah, you're right, Adrian. I wanted to ask him if they actually have rifles with them. You know, I didn't know if that was appropriate. But I think it was David, he did say that it's kind of like everybody has to watch out for their own safety around wildlife. And so maybe they have bear spray, or maybe they do carry a rifle with them when they're out in the forests. And what other, you know, any other types of safety gear to be able to survive an encounter that could be really scary. But that's awesome. And like I said, I know they said they work with fish and wildlife. They said they work with hunters. So they probably, and they also work with people who track wildlife. Yeah, that's really cool right there. And hopefully next year in our next Zoom meeting series, we'll have those wildlife people come in and talk to us about what they do. Absolutely. And what about you, Cruz? What did you think?
I didn't think there's that much to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I like how some of the positions you don't have to go to college for like 4 years.
That is the biggest thing that I like. I like that you guys can do this now if you want. You can graduate high school. Right now you could probably, definitely do, what is that called? Running Start. And you can study the STEM and the forestry sciences at Grace Harbor College. So you can do that while you're in high school. When you graduate, you can even go to Grace Harbor College and study those areas and get hired on with them or hired on with one of their contractors and work for a few years and get those experiences and then hopefully get hired on to work with them to get that tuition, not the reimbursement, but to have them send you to school, and then you're not paying student loans. And then you really know if you really want to do that career, right? And that's kind of the point of our internship program. We think we know what we want to do, but when we do it, we probably don't like it. So the last thing you want to do is go to college and spend $30,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 in a study of a career that you don't like, like you find out later you don't like it. So it's so much better to be able to take that time while you're in high school, and then after high school to do the internships, to do the summer stuff, the summer programs, to start at the entry level and just work and see if that's what you want to do. Because like they were saying, most companies, like big companies like Rayonier, and most companies, they have some sort of tuition reimbursement or some sort of educational program, similar to the military, where they will send you to school, or they'll pay off some of your college costs if you have them. And so that's something to consider, instead of going into debt. You can definitely work and work for a company. And then if you really like it, then go through their program. Then you're going to school for free. You're in a career that you like. And when you graduate from college, while you're working with the company, they'll promote you. And they said that they get $3,000 to $5,000 raises every year, depending on experience and education. So, the more education you get through the company, the more money you will make. And so one of my takeaways too is they make a lot of money. 30 to 40,000 a year to start is excellent. Straight out of high school, straight out of college, that's excellent. And to be able to get to the potential of 75 to 80K a year, I mean, you can almost raise a family of 4 on that easily, And so that's awesome. You can make a lot of good money doing what you love in natural resources, wildlife, forestry, and flying drones. And then the data stuff too. That's interesting. If you're in a data and statistics and number crunching, I'm pretty sure those positions in that company, they probably make north of 6 figures easily. Definitely. So do you guys have any other things you want to add today? All right, well, thank you for joining. You will each get an hour for this week. And many of you who joined us last week, we already have you down for an hour. And we are so excited that you're joining us every Thursday. My assignment for all of you is to tell 3 to 5 of your friends about this, and to go on the Facebook page and see Ellie's awesome events, and to follow us on Facebook. We're now on Snapchat, we're now on Instagram, we're now on Twitter and LinkedIn, so make sure you're following Grays Harbor Youth Works on those platforms. I'm slowly following everybody. I joined Snapchat yesterday, and so I'm slowly some of you followed me back. I got to follow the rest of you back. I'm figuring out the Snapchat, it's kind of fun. So you're probably going to see some crazy rainbow style emojis from me. I love bit emojis, so I like how Snapchat is connected to that. So you're going to see my bit emojis because I love it. Cheryl says she's very proud of you all. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Thank you, Cheryl. And we're proud of you too, Cheryl. Because I have to tell you, Cheryl, it's just me and Cheryl. I don't know if you guys know that, but it's pretty much just us. Cheryl runs the whole Grays Harbor Youth Works strategy, and then I just manage our internship program. And so it's just us two. And we have some awesome high-speed internships through the social media internship. And then the rest of you, you don't understand how much we appreciate your support, and you're constantly getting back to us on time and helping us with the social media, because our workload is really heavy. But a lot of the work we want to do, we know you can do it, and we want to give you that opportunity to do it and to explore, social media, explore working with the nonprofit. and to explore your career interest. And so we really appreciate you. Like I said, your next assignment, get 3 to 5 of your friends and your buddies to join us next Thursday. Next Thursday's cool. We have, where's my calendar? We have Sarah Owen from Grays Harbor Beyond Survival, and she's also a part of Harbor Include, and she is what you call an outreach and engagement person in the human services field. And so she's going to tell us all about human services, what they do to help people who are struggling with all kinds of things, what they do, and she's going to tell us about what she does when she in terms of community outreach, education, and a lot of the advocacy she does around women and children and families and young people who are LGBTQ. And so that's going to be interesting. And Sarah's fun. You can actually follow her on Facebook, Sarah Owen. She actually does, on Wednesdays, she does these live stream, really cool live stream sessions, mainly for elementary and middle school students. So maybe your siblings might be interested, but she talks about like self-esteem, self-empowerment, you know, how to love yourself, how to have self-discipline. And she does it every Wednesday on Facebook. So check her out, but you will definitely meet her next week. And I think she told me she's gonna have some fun activities for us, you know? So it's gonna be exciting. All right. All of you have a good one. Cheryl's gonna stay on. Me and Cheryl are gonna talk a little bit, but we want you all to have a great afternoon. You just learned about the outdoor careers, so get outside right now. Thanks so much. Thank you all. It's so good to see your faces. Thank you. Thanks for joining, JP, man. It's hard to track it down, but thanks for joining. Bye, Ellie. Bye, Brianna. Bye, Katrina. Bye, Adrian. See you all next week. It's going to be great. Bye, Adrian. Hey, Cheryl, how's it going? Oh, you're on mute. Let me.
Okay, I'm getting it. Great job again. You amazed me.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off